Couple of tips and tricks I do to all my trucks before trail. I don't know if you guys have used this stuff or not. I love this stuff. There's a few reasons why I love fluid film. First of all, it's actually accepted for use in the food industry in Canada, which says a lot about the chemistry of the product. So it doesn't have any emulsifiers in it whatsoever, which means it never dries out. There's technical stuff behind that, but you can look it up. It's called emulsifiers, and this doesn't have any. The other reason I like it is because it's actually a wax product. So besides being a lubricant and a rust protector and all the other things that most of these kinds of lubrication cans will promote, this one also has kind of a slimy, waxy goo that comes out of it. And it stays on your stuff forever. So I like that a lot, and I'll explain to you why I use this product in a couple of key places, and something that else, the one other thing that I'm definitely do to my trucks before I go on the trail. So let's get started. Alright, this doesn't look like much, but I put toe out on every single one of my scale trucks. Toe out. Now what does that mean? What that means is, when the truck is tracking straight down the road, this is straight down the road, the front tires are actually pointed away from the center line just slightly. Toe in would be when the tires are pointed in towards the center line. Toe out is when the tires are pointed away from the center line. Now, that sounds like grasping at straws, okay? I realize that. I realize that almost nobody is going to care. If you have a high-speed vehicle, toe in and camber and caster, all that stuff matters a huge amount. Now, I imagine you probably already know this, but geometry and caster and camber and kingpin angle and stuff, it actually does matter to traction issues on scale trucks. You can increase or decrease traction in the front end by changing the kingpin angle, by changing the caster, by changing the Ackerman on the steering jump. There's a lot of tricks you can do geometrically with the math in the front end that can change the way the vehicle drives. One of those tricks that I always do is I always add some toe out to my trucks. Not much. It's usually maybe 1.5 degrees, 2, 3. I'm not too picky. None of these go very fast. And I don't know if you can actually see it on this one or not, but because the tires on these scale trucks are so floppy, but I have toe out on this vehicle just a tiny bit. And the way that I achieved it was so easy. I just simply I unscrewed the one rod end here off the tie bar. I unscrewed the rod end and I just added 2 little tiny washers here, painted them black, put them on there. 2 tiny little washers, that's it. I just spread apart the front of the wheels a little tiny bit. That's it. Now what's the point? 2 reasons. There's 2 reasons why this is important to me on my trucks. The first reason is because we're constantly riding over stuff, pushing and pulling the treads on the rim. So the tread is constantly being pushed around by rocks. When you drive with a little bit of toe out, typically it helps the steering angle a little bit on the inside. And you want to have the wheels steering at a different angle on the circle. You want more angle on the inside wheel and less angle on the outside wheel. Okay? And the reason for that is because when you're turning, the circle is a bigger diameter on the outside than it is on the inside when you turn. So you need a different angle. That's Ackerman settings can fix that for you. But also, towing out the wheels just slightly will help you get that. you will always have a little bit of extra turn in on the inside wheel. So with no other changes, they'll always get a little extra turn in. I like that. And the second reason is because the rod ends that are here constantly in the way of the tire. You know, these tires are so soft on these scale trucks now that you can actually rub the tire on the rod ends for the steering. And a lot of you guys have experienced this already. If you go trailing for long enough and you happen to have some tire that's close to the rod ends, after a bunch of heavy trail time, you'll find out that the tire has moved over into the rod end. You're pushing it into the rod end while you're driving, and that's wearing the rubber on the inside of the tire. It happens a lot. I've had it on my trucks too. I almost cut the tire completely off on one truck. I did like a 4-hour trail ride without really noticing, and just literally wore the rubber off the inside of the tire because it was touching the tie rod. So, my fault. I get it, but there's ways to help that. One of the ways that I like to do is with the toe out. Toe out, when you're driving straight, toe out constantly makes the tire tread try to steer away from the vehicle. Toe out is always steering away from the center line. It's not much, but a little bit can help actually pull the tires away from the center line on the foams. Okay? These move around so much that even if you just drive straight with four-wheel traction for 6 or 10 feet going straight, you can actually you can almost see the tires pulling away from the center line because the rubber is trying to get away from there because of the angle of the steering, and it slides the tire out on the foam just slightly, just enough. So when you get back into the rough stuff, it might actually keep your tire off the tie rod from rubbing on the tie rod. Please take a look at that. It's something to consider. The second thing that I always do along that same line is if you happen to have clearance problems here where the tire's a little too close to the tie rods, just simply sand off the tie rod, okay? You're not going to weaken it so much that it's unusable. So sand off the tie rod. Make this part here a little bit thinner on the outside of the tie rod so that you can actually get some tire clearance. If it's a 0.5 millimeter, and you make it really, really smooth, so there's no rough edges, then you can actually keep the tire from cutting through. They're so soft these days. It's one of those things I always do. Now, before trailing, the second thing that I do every single time that I take my trucks out is I lubricate all of the drive shaft joints and the axle joints. That's why I'm talking about this stuff. Every single time I go out. That seems a little extreme, yeah, but it's not, because the underside of the truck gets wet just from wet grass. It gets wet from small puddles, maybe splashing. Even if you're not a water guy, you're not a water feature guy, you just don't drive your truck in the water. Even then, do you really want to drive with totally dry U-joints and drive shafts? Do you really want that rotating metal with all the torque of the entire vehicle to be dry? I don't. So I spray them. I spray the slide here, just a little tiny bit. Just the tiniest little bit. And it's got this waxy, weird finish on it. And it'll eventually work its way in. And then every single one of these, I give them just the smallest little squirt, just to make sure that there's some lubrication that can work its way in there. If you happen to have too much on there, you can just get it with a rag, just kind of wipe it off, but at least it's in the joint, you know what I mean? Get that thing lubed up. Same with these. I always do the transmission ones before I put the interior on, so at least they have an initial lubrication. All of these. And you know what? If you go out for a 15-minute trail ride, you might not have to do this again for a little while, but if you go out for a 2 or 3 hour trail ride, or you actually burn through a battery in one of these trucks, you need to go over these all over again. So this is going to help you guys just keep all your joints working for a really long time. Don't be afraid of putting a little lube on there. And also in the steering. Now this one, the TK, Trail King, this thing has these monster universal joints in there. They're just absolute monsters. And so getting some lubrication in there is really going to matter. These are going to have a ton of torque on them. And they steer at an ungodly angle. I think it's 50 degrees. So absolutely have to do this if you want to make sure that you can keep the best bearing health and U-joint health in your truck. Give it some lube. Now, you all are at home right now. There, you can actually see the little waxy blob that's still coming out of the end there. It's a little bit of wax there. It just sits there, same as it does on those. With that said, if you don't have this kind of stuff that has no emulsifiers, make sure you do not use WD-40. It's got emulsifiers in it like heavy, and it dries out. It actually, it's WD-40 is actually called that. It's displacing water, and it's named WD-40 because it was the 40th time they tried to make a solution that would actually disperse water, and this one actually does. So they called it WD-40. It's not a lubricant. It's oily and sticky, yeah, but it's not a lubricant. It's designed to wick moisture away from objects and then dry it out. That's what it's designed to do. It's WD-40. It displaces water. So if you spray that in your joints and then you get your joints wet, it's going to draw away all the water that it can right into your joint and then dry out. And then you get super rusty joints. It's so bad. Don't use that stuff. One of the best things that you could possibly use on it is Grandma's 3-in-1 oil. I say that because the first time I ever saw this was at my grandparents' place. They've been making this stuff, I think, since pretty much cows were invented, okay? Like, I mean, this stuff is old. It works great. There's no emulsifiers in it. You can have a can from 1930 and it's still good. So, if you find a can of this stuff, it's worth having around. They even make it in a little tiny, like pen size, tiny little applicator with a little squirt thing in it. A couple of drops of this stuff. It soaks right in. It does basically the same job as this. It's almost the same chemistry on the liquid side, except that this stuff has a waxy coating that goes with it, where the 3-in-1 does not. But this is a really good lubricant and rust protector. It adheres to steel parts. It's a quality freaking thing. If you don't have any of this, use some of this. That's what I recommend. So the truck's been squirted. I enjoy the tow on it. I checked to make sure the tie rods are not rubbing on the tires, and now it's time to hit the trail. If any of this was useful to you guys, smash the thumbs up button right there. And I'd be really happy to see you on the next one. And maybe sometime this year we'll be able to do a trail together. Chat soon.